Okay, welcome back, everyone. Let's get started with our ornamental session. And we'll start with Dr. Will Hudson. And he is an entomologist, worked with us for so many years and wealth of knowledge on insect issues. Um, so, Will, we can get started.
All right, then. I'm going to run through about three or four things here real quickly. And then, of course, we can do questions if I miss the one you want. I wanted to start off with the Joro because it's an ongoing saga. Most people in North Georgia, at least, are pretty familiar with it at this point. I would say I've talked to a number of my colleagues in the last couple of weeks, and this year we have in my yard a few more than we had last year, but not near as many as the year before that. And it's sort of up and down in a lot of places around the state, but I think we're settling into what we can expect from now on, it seems to me. So remember, we only documented this thing about 10 years ago in Georgia, and it has expanded. And this is the latest map from our Joro Watch EdMaps thing. And there are some outliers up here in West Virginia. That's sort of hard to explain. But basically, it's sort of oozing out from where we started, which is Athens is right here. So, just Madison County, which is right next to Athens, is where the first documented occurrence was. I suspect that that eventually we're about the top third of Georgia now. Eventually, it'll go all the way down to the Gulf Coast. Eventually, it'll go all the way up at least into southern New England, and eventually it'll go all the way to the Mississippi River and beyond. The native range would make that seem like a reasonable expectation. They are spectacular. We've got lots of pictures of things that they eat. They will eat anything almost. There are a couple of recommendations that Don and I put out a publication on this. And our biggest recommendation for these spiders for people and homeowners, and just as a general rule, your tolerance level is what determines what you need to do about them. For me, if I keep them out of the places I walk in the shrubbery where I go to turn the hose on and things like that, they don't bother me very much. But if you've got a pollinator garden, don't allow Joro spiders to build webs near it because they'll scarf up all of your pollinators. If you keep bees, in particular, don't allow Joro spiders to build their webs around your bee yard because that concentrates them in an area where your bees are coming and going, and they will readily feed on any number of different insects, but honeybees and other pollinators are really common prey items to find in the webs. And this was my yard last year in May, not this year, but last year. Early on, I put out these cages around some little pepper plants and whatnot, and every single square had a Joro spider web in it. So in that area, there was about 25 square feet. There were somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 tiny little Joro spiders that had established their webs. They did not all survive, fortunately, but a good many of them did. They don't look, when they're small, like the big ones. These guys are very small. A centimeter is about 4/10 of an inch. So tip of the leg to the tip of the leg is less than a half inch, obviously. They grow pretty fast, and then they change colors, and eventually they begin to get a fair amount of yellow on the abdomen, and then the full adult coloration that we saw in that first picture with the yellow abdomen with kind of teal or greenish blue stripes across it indicates that female is fully mature and ready to mate and begin maturing the eggs. And this is the corner of my front porch where I was watching these spiders to see what they would do, and they did just fine until my wife had enough of it, at which point they were removed. I did do some screening of pesticides, homeowner available pesticides. The 7 here, in spite of a very, very familiar name, is not carbaryl. It's actually nowadays got, in this particular case, it was lambda-cyhalothrin plus pyromethrin, I believe. This black flag had a couple of different pyrethroids in it as well. This was just dishwashing soap because everybody thinks Dawn dishwashing liquid will kill spiders. It will if you drown them in it, but it takes more than that to actually kill them as a general rule. Insecticidal soap was reasonably effective, and this Zevo, which at the time had geraniol and cinnamon oil in it, now it has a different set of active ingredients, but it was pretty much dynamite. What I would caution you, boy, are these that are just squeeze bottles, and the Zevo itself, you need to be about a foot or so away from the spider when you spray it, which a lot of people don't want to be a foot from a spider, even if you've got poison in your hand and you're fixing to kill it. If you are reluctant to get that close, then get one of these spray or aerosols that is designed to shoot up under the eaves and spray hornet and wasp nests from a safe distance. If you take this stuff, or even the 7, which is dynamite, is very, very effective if you spray it on them. If you take that and spray it from 4 feet away, you will not kill the spiders. Okay, the next thing, the dreaded yellow-legged hornet in Georgia. There was a lot of publicity about this back in August, I guess, when we first detected the yellow-legged hornet. It is from Asia. It mainly is a problem for us, or an important pest for us, because they really like to feed on honeybees. And these were detected in Georgia, actually over in Savannah at the Savannah Honey Company at their bee yard, because they were hovering around the beehives and picking off the bees as they came and went. Almost like a peregrine falcon picking off the ducks when they come and go to the pond. And they can eat a lot of bees. So our beekeepers are very, very concerned. As you may have heard, we did destroy one colony and thought we might have got it done, then found another, and then another. And at this point, the last count I heard was 5, which suggests that this was not their first year, which suggests that we may be stuck with this for a while. The nearest comparison I would make with these guys is to our ball-faced hornet. Their biology and social structure are very much the same. They're like yellow jackets also, in that these are single-year colonies. The overwintering queen starts up the colony, starts making the nest, feeds the developing young until they become adults themselves, and then they take over that duty, and the queen just lays eggs. Early season, they feed on a lot of different things. They're predators on a number of different types of insects. They also feed at nectar and fruit and things like that. So they're very prolificous when it comes to picking out what they want to eat. That changes as you get into the summer and the colony grows. Then they start to really select protein sources, and maybe the best and easiest one for them to find is honeybees. So they will pick those honeybees off because they're concentrated in one spot, and they're really good at preying on them. So that's where you really have a problem. I said they're like ball-faced hornets. They are about the same size. You can see they're slightly different. There's this narrow yellow band at the base of the abdomen, and then at the tip, a broader orangish yellow band. They're called yellow-legged hornets. It's actually just the feet that are yellow. They are individually about the size of a ball-faced hornet, but where 500 or 600 ball-faced hornets would be a pretty good-sized colony, you're looking at 5,000 to 6,000 of these, and the nest is also bigger. The one I saw most of the nest on was about the size of a pretty good-sized dorm refrigerator. So a very, very large. It's easy to see. We don't ever see ball-faced hornet nests until the leaves come off the trees. You can spot these from a ways off. And they start off in protected areas under a sill, or a lot of times in a shed or something, and then move out into the tree later on in July and early August. We do have quite a few lookalikes. I'm not going to go into that too much. It's available on our website and on the yellow-legged hornet website. The Department of Ag has a lot of good information about this. They're fairly easy to tell apart. The one that I most often am getting sent in as lookalike is this European hornet. And the thing that tells me this is the European hornet is a lot more yellow on the abdomen, and you got these sort of, it almost looks like they were painted. The dark stripes were painted and it dripped a little bit. And this is also an inch or a little more big, and these are more like 3/4 of an inch or so. So food, well, I went through that. There's very little public health risk from these generally because most of the time the way you get stung by hornets is if you bump into the nest. It's hard to bump into a nest that's 80 feet up in a tree. But if you do disturb the nest, instead of 500 like you would get with a bald-faced hornet, you may get 5,000 coming after you, and that will not be a good afternoon. The other two I want to hit real quickly, crepe myrtle bark scale and azalea bark scale, are two problematic scales that have are recent introductions into the state of Georgia. They are bark scales. They're both ericoxid scales, which are also called felt scales. The females cover themselves with this felt-like white wax and lay their eggs inside underneath all of that. They start off, this is the female, and then she coats her body with the felt and lays her eggs up under there. And there can be several hundred eggs under there, which if there's several hundred eggs under each of these females, that's a lot of crawlers when they hatch out. And the sooty mold that grows on the honeydew they excrete can really make crepe myrtles look bad. We're used to getting this sort of stuff on crepe myrtle aphid honeydew. These scales, I think, probably produce even more honeydew than the aphids do. And the azalea bark scale is a close relative with very similar life cycle. There's looking at somewhere between 2 and 4 generations a year of crepe myrtle bark scale. The azalea bark scale is probably 2 or 3, depending on where you are in Georgia. But again, you can see how the branches of these azaleas turn black from the sooty mold that's growing on the honeydew that's deposited. The systemic materials like imidacloprid and clothianidin and thiamethoxam and even dinotefuran work pretty well on these guys. You can introduce insect growth regulator products like there's any number of them that are available, but distance is probably the one that's most commonly used in landscapes. But remember that all these neonicotinoid materials have pollinator health restrictions that limit the timing when you can apply them. And specifically, it says you don't put it on these plants in a landscape situation if they're in bloom or pre-bloom. Pick a time when a crepe myrtle is not either in bloom or pre-bloom. So you're looking at having to make this application very, very early in the season to comply with the restrictions on the labels. And with that, I'll let Gene, I think, go next.
Thank you so much, Bill. Yeah, so the next speaker is Dr. Jean Williams-Woodward. She's a plant pathologist working with ornamentals.
Today, I'm wanting to give you a little bit of a disease update, particularly of one particular disease. Just want to let you know there are lots of diseases out there. Most of the time, I'm giving something as more of a gloom and doom, a talk, an update. And today, I kind of want to give you a little bit of some good news. So there are a lot of diseases out there, the same ones that we've been talking about for many years now. Things like phytophthora within the landscapes, a lot of different fungal leaf spots on plants. We're losing a lot of our leaves from the deciduous trees, but we're also still seeing a lot of Passiflora needle blight on Leyland cypress, and as well as some of the other needled evergreens. And then also, just because it's been so dry, we had a lot of problems with powdery mildew showing up on things like roses, even some of the crepe myrtles, but dogwoods are having problems. So a lot of that should all be ending now, with a lot of the deciduous plants actually losing their leaves. But I do want to talk to you about one disease, that is the boxwoods. So it's diseases on boxwoods, because the most common problem I've had this year is really what's killing my boxwoods, and what's wrong with them. And really, the answer is that there is no easy answer. We have several different diseases that we're dealing with, including boxwood blight, which I've talked about for a long time. That's caused by the fungus Calanectria pseudoniviculata. But there's also boxwood dieback, and I've talked about this one as well. This one is caused by the fungus Calototrum theobromicula. Boxwood dieback is something that I am seeing more and more of. Then there's also the Volutella blight, which is the Pseudonectria buxi. It used to be called Volutella buxi, and that's why we call it Volutella blight. But we're also seeing things like Phytophthora root rot, as well as boxwood leaf miner damage. But the big thing I want to talk to you about right now is boxwood blight. This is a picture of boxwood blight infected boxwoods in one landscape. And what we tend to see, or what we do see with symptoms of boxwood blight, is that the symptoms are going to vary sometimes with cultivar as well as also the time of the year. The biggest thing I want you to look for, though, is defoliation. So one of the things that boxwood blight does is it turns the leaves tan. It then will cause those leaves to actually drop from the plant. And I kind of misspoke. They don't always turn tan, and they can actually turn more of a dark, greasy green color to tan color to brown. And sometimes they will even drop off when they're still green. So if you look at this picture on the lower left-hand side, you'll see that there's actually a patch of defoliation up closer to the top. There's also down on the ground, you'll see all the defoliated leaves. So all of that fallen leaf litter is, if you call me out and I look at a landscape to see, do I think this is boxwood blight? The first thing I'm going to do is look for this fallen leaf litter, because the other boxwood blight or boxwood diseases that affect the foliage won't cause this defoliation. This is something that boxwood blight will do. So look for that fallen leaf litter. The next thing I start looking for is I look for black stem lesions. And in the center picture here, you can see some of the black lesions on the stem. You can also see some of the tan leaves, and also a lot of the leaves are just already fallen off the plant, or they've fallen off the stem, but they haven't dropped from the canopy completely. The third thing I start looking for is these leaf spots. These spots tend to be more round, or they could be irregular if they're starting from the margin of the leaf, but they have more of a greasy look to them. And so you can see these spots showing up here. You can also see some of the spotting showing up on some of these brown leaves in the center picture. And then even the picture on the right-hand side, you can see the defoliation, the discoloration that's happening, the greasy looking leaves, that their leaves are turning kind of this greasy look to them. And then some of them even will have some of the spotting to them. So that's boxwood blight. Okay. These are the symptoms I need you to be looking for. When I talk about some of the things about doom and gloom, or maybe a ray of hope, is I've talked about boxwood blight in the past, and I basically have told you all to rip out everything to try to get rid of boxwood blight, because we do see landscapes that are decimated by boxwood blight. And so the picture in the lower left-hand side here are some 70-year-old dwarf English boxwoods that have been killed by boxwood blight, and they were killed within a matter of months. So it can be an extremely devastating disease. But then in other cases, like the main picture here on the slide, these plants seem to be hanging on. You see a lot of defoliation, you see a lot of blighting, you see a lot of browning, and this intermittent kind of patchiness throughout the entire landscape, or that entire planting. But the plants aren't dead, or at least they're not dead yet. Some of this difference could be due to susceptibility of the cultivars. It's a dwarf English boxwood in the lower right-hand side. It is actually, I think, a Korean boxwood or American boxwood in this main picture. So cultivars, the degree of severity of the disease will depend upon the cultivar. But what I wanted to show you is when we talk about management of boxwood blight, the recommended control practices have always been removal of the infected plants. And that was going back to trying to stop the spread of the disease throughout the landscape. We also told you to disinfect pruning tools, gloves, clothing, boots, anything that came in contact with the boxwoods, and disinfesting them. The two that work the best are 70% ethanol or an isopropyl alcohol, like this rubbing alcohol in the picture, or the ready-to-use disinfectant sprays, like this Lysol disinfectant spray. They contain up to basically 58% to maybe 62% of ethanol. And they actually are very effective. They'll kill spores within 5 seconds. The other thing that's been talked about with some of the researchers on boxwood blight talked about installing a mulch barrier. That's basically putting a covering underneath the plants, and so that you're protecting it from any of the fallen leaf litter that may have been there. I don't see this as being a great thing to do, mainly because you always get more leaves falling into that mulch. So I don't see that as a great recommended practice. The other thing is really the avoiding wetting the foliage if you're irrigating. So anything that can create water splash could potentially move those spores around within that canopy. The other thing is then using resistant cultivars. These are mostly the Korean types instead of American or dwarf English, because the American and dwarf English, or the American is the common boxwood, the sempervirens, or the dwarf English, those two are the most susceptible. There are some other varieties that are also very susceptible, but that's typically what I'm going to see as being the most susceptible. Some of the Korean types, they vary in susceptibility. So some of them are more susceptible. Actually, when the temperatures get cool, you start seeing more damage on them. But then in the summertime, you don't see any damage. But overall, they would be a better choice to go in if you were doing any replanting. The other thing we talk about is using fungicides, and these are preventative fungicide applications that are generally 7 to 14 day interval applications, which is not practical for a landscape company. The two products that are the most effective actually are chlorothalonil and the fludeoxonil. That would be like Daconil or Medallion, but there are also those products used in combination with other products in some of the combination products like Spectro 90 or even Palladium. So there are other products as well. Tebuconazole and propiconazole, these are ones that are the triazole groups, or they're called the DMI fungicides. They also were effective. And those two, the tebuconazole and propiconazole, are systemic, whereas the chlorothalonil and the fludeoxonil are not. They are contact products. So even incorporating a contact like a chlorothalonil and a tebuconazole together could give you better control, because you're getting that contact plus the systemic activity of those fungicides. But they still need very frequent applications of fungicides to be very effective. The last thing here is really trying to do anything you can to reduce spore dispersal, or basically spore spread in the landscape. This boxwood blight does not spread on its own. The spores are too heavy to blow in the wind. If they're even doing water splash, the splash is basically maybe 1 to 2 feet at the most. You're thinking about a raindrop splashing some spores. How this disease really spreads around are things like this beautiful cat. So pets in the landscape, dogs, cats, birds, they will spread boxwood blight around. And where we've seen where boxwood blight where it almost looks like the plants have recovered in landscapes, it's where they have eliminated their pets from that landscape. That's one of the things I want to talk to you about and show you right now. Okay. So this is boxwood blight in a landscape. The first picture on the left-hand side that picture was taken in October of 2020. You can see the boxwood blight symptoms. On the picture on the right-hand side, I just took last month. So in October of 2023, it's the same plants. The plants were not removed in 2020. These are the exact same plants. I believe this variety may be Kingswood boxwood. It stays really low and very small. But you can see how you're getting a flush of growth. The plants have actually filled in. They looked good. There is boxwood blight, even in the good picture. So those plants that look good, there's boxwood blight directly behind it. So on the back side of that planting, you can find symptoms of boxwood blight. But the thing about this landscape is the homeowner is actually out spraying. They spray a lot. They spray a lot of fungicides very regularly. And they also have eliminated their dogs from coming into this area. So they're not seeing the spread from the animals that they could have seen in the past. So it's both really judicious use of fungicides, using those fungicides to try to suppress the disease, but also eliminating the spread from things like pets. Same landscape here. This is different cultivar. These are American boxwoods. And you can see the one on the right-hand side was taken in October of 2020. The one on the left is October 2023. You can see here where the plants are still alive. They're still doing okay, but they are showing many more symptoms of boxwood blight, and they're not filling in like the previous one. And that's the difference in the cultivars. You still could keep them in. I think I'm not going to go in and tell you have to rip out all of your boxwoods, but you definitely need to either, if you're keeping boxwoods with boxwood blight in a landscape, you must use fungicides to suppress the pathogen, and you have to keep your pets away from those plants, or you will see a lot more spread. And just to reiterate that, these are plants that I inoculated. I inoculated the center plant in the grouping on the left-hand side in March of 2021, got severe infection, severe symptom development within 2 months after inoculation. But today, those plants look okay. As a plant pathologist, that disappoints me because I want to see death. But here, they look good. And again, the main reason they look good is nobody is touching these plants. We're not going in and we're not pruning them. We're not touching them with our hands, gloves. There are no pets and no animals going around those plants. And I still can find boxwood blight present in those plants, but I'm not seeing it spread. One of the things I'm going to do is mess with these plants a little bit this year. We're going to go back in and actually re-inoculate, mess with them, and see if we can actually see if that changes and that we actually see spread. By messing with them, that means just touching them all over the place with gloves and trying to simulate kind of pet movement through those plants. So I'll be back and tell you more about that when we see how the experiment goes. But there is some hope with boxwood blight. I think we can actually manage some of it with fungicides, but it has to be repeated applications and a much more frequent interval. The other thing is keeping pets out. I have one garden that they have actually installed an electric fence around their boxwood plantings, specifically to keep the pets from actually going in, their dogs from going into that garden. And they probably will get their boxwoods back. The last disease I want to really talk about is actually boxwood blight or boxwood dieback, Boxwood dieback, the Calototrichum theobromicula. This is the one I said that I'm seeing much more of. It is extremely common right now. You see this dieback of the foliage where you're getting these brown and tanned stems showing up. Those stems look exactly like Voluatella blight, and I'll show you a picture of them. But the difference between with the Calototrichum is that you can get black stem lesions that look a lot like boxwood blight stem lesions, but your leaves stay attached, whereas boxwood blight, you're going to get defoliation. You still will see some black stem lesions. If you cut and scrape through those black stem lesions, though, for the boxwood dieback with the Calototrichum infection, you'd actually see some more dark discoloration inside that stem that we don't see with boxwood blight. So boxwood dieback, foliage turns tan to brown, stays attached, and you will also see some black stem lesions, but there'll be a lot of dark discoloration behind that, okay? Voluatella blight is the other one that's been around forever. It is one that is often associated with weakened plants. We get co-infections of Voluatella and Calototrichum. And the big thing about the Voluatella blight is that you're looking for more of that peachy kind of sporulation on the backside of the leaves. You still will get tan foliage developing, some branch dieback, but you don't get the defoliation, and you also don't get black stem lesions with the Voluatella blight. You're going to be looking more for those peachy colored, salmon colored spores that might be on the backside of the leaves for the Voluatella. The final thing I want to leave you with is that when we talk about boxwood disease management, we're really talking about boxwood health management, okay? Boxwood dieback and Voluatella blight are most likely related to weakened plants from root damage. That could be root injuries, stress, or root rot. It could also be those environmental stresses, things like freeze and drought and excessive pruning. We saw a lot of boxwoods dying because of the freeze we had earlier in the spring. That also weakened plants, and then the Calototrichum and the Voluatella came in and caused even further damage. So one of the things we need to do with the boxwoods is just optimize the plant health with fertilization and irrigation only when needed, or only when needed during periods of drought. Boxwoods do not need a lot of water. We kill more plants in the landscape by over irrigating than we ever kill with drought. Too much water for boxwoods will also lead to Phytophthora root rot. And this is a picture of some Phytophthora root rot showing up in a boxwood planting, where you can see the whole kind of planting is turning yellow and just looks poor. That yellowing is associated with the root rot. It could also be from poor nutrition because if you have damaged roots, they're not taking up any of the nutrition as well. So that's typical of what I'll see with Phytophthora, but then eventually the plants will die with Phytophthora. Fungicides and most of the same fungicides you use for boxwood blight will also help to suppress the Calototrichum and the Volutella. And the biggest thing is to keep those pets out of the gardens. And that's probably the best thing to do for trying to manage the diseases. So that's all I have for you. And hopefully I'll be able to stick around a little bit and answer any questions.
Thank you so much. It was an excellent presentation. He's here. So if you have any questions, please put it on in the Q&A box here. So she can answer towards the end. So next speaker is Dr. Mark Czarnota. He's a weed specialist here with UGA working in ornamentals. Mark.
Hello, just got to share screen here. Let's see. All right, can you see that?
Yes.
Let me get this out of the way.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I'm just going to give you a brief update on some weed control stuff that's popped up in the past year, and hopefully this will help you out a little bit and prevent damage to plant material. And of course, some of the herbicides, new ones that bounced on the market here just this year and probably about 2 years ago on the tower and crew, what I'll talk about. So anyway, but my name is Mark. I'm at the University of Georgia at the Griffin Station, and I do weed control work and ornamentals, small fruits, orchard floor management. And I like to say I do all the bastard crops that nobody else wants to do. But anyway, I'd say about half my time now is spent on blueberries because I don't know if you know, we're number one in the country in blueberry production and acreage, and it's just getting more and more complicated as I go on with several issues we're dealing with. And I'm going to talk about one here at the end that kind of affects the ornamentals with dicamba. And they're interested in growing these things in containers now too. So there's going to be a lot of container production, I think, as we move forward. Florida wants the crop insurance will insure them in above the ground. So anyway, with further ado, I'll get started talking about ornamentals. Let me see here. Okay, I can scroll. Okay. So anyway, I was going to talk about two herbicides that you might have been come across here, and there's the two new ones, are almost new, and these are just granular herbicides you would use in the landscape and turf, and they're either from OHP, which often a lot of people don't know, but they're a marketing arm. Really, they do some research, but it's very minimal. And they're a marketing arm usually from like Bayer Chemical or Creativa or some other company, because those companies just don't have the staff of salespeople to really push the product and take it out there and let growers use it and troubleshoot it and do everything they need to do to try to get the product out there. But anyway, the first one is Forte, which is flumioxazin and prodiamine. And if you have used flumioxazin before, that's available also on the trade name Broadstar, which is granular, and also as a spray as SureGuard in the ornamental industry. It's got a whole bunch of names and different crops, and it's all the same thing in different containers as far as the granular that's out there. But there's also a liquid form now too for the sprayable product. But anyway, this is a 0.75 granular, and the two herbicides are in group 14 and 3, and the REI, the reentry interval, is supposed to be about 12 hours, and the product, the max use rate is 100 pounds of product per acre, and that works out to be about 2.3 pounds per 1,000 square feet. Yeah, unfortunately, you still can't use this in the greenhouse. They recommend some of the things I've noticed on the label are no greenhouse, no pots less than 4 inches, and world plants or bedding plants, meaning world plants where you can really concentrate that herbicide in a whorl. And then if you get a water event, it'll leach out that herbicide and cause a bunch of damage. So anyway, but this, usually flumioxazin by itself, if you use that with the Broadstar product, you would use that at 150 pounds, which is equivalent to a 6-ounce spray with the liquid. So, and the liquids, you can go up to 12 ounces in ornamental situations. So it's only half the rate of the spray if you use the Broadstar. But the thing you're getting is the prodiamine behind it. I noticed in the peach industry that I deal with, they were starting to have problems with coreopsis, which most people in the ornamental industry grows in ornamental, but it's also can be a weedy problem in South Georgia. And that's one that's pretty tolerant to flumioxazin, and you almost started to have, and it's in the aster family, and a lot of the aster plants are getting pretty tolerant to, or starting to develop resistance, if you want to say that, to flumi. And this is why sometimes you'll need a tank mix partner or a mixture in a granular blend. And this is what we have here. But if you use this product, you're going to get you should get reliable 2.5, 3 months of weed control in containers or landscape. And, it's a good addition to what we have particularly with the prodiamine addition. The next one I wanted to talk about, if you're not familiar with, it's been around for about 2-3 years now. It's Crew or Fortress. It's the same thing in a different bag for different industries. The Crew is meant for the landscape situations mainly, and then Fortress is for the nursery production side. It's, like I said, the exact same thing in a different bag. It's a group 21 and a group 3 herbicide with the diethylpyr and the azoxybin. And the REI is 12 hours. It's 150 pounds of product maximum per application. And again, no greenhouse pots or no greenhouse pots less than 4-inch world plants or Betty plants on the label. And again, this is a great product. You can run into some problems with diethylpyr. It can be problematic with it. A lot of people don't know this, but it's in the same family. The PYR, that's in the same family as the growth regulator herbicides, triclopyr, clopyralid, fluroxypyr. And for some strange reason, this herbicide does not cause a lot of damage if you use it at certain rates or being root absorbed to plant material to cause issues. But if you start getting the rates too high, you can. And I'll show you some pictures that I ran into a problem earlier this year. So anyway, let me see here. As far as the herbicides for the ornamental industry, this is it. This is pretty much all of them that are available currently. Some of these you may have never heard of or never use, but this is what we got. And then pretty much everything that's labeled in containers is labeled in the landscape. And of course, what would be Broadstar would be the only one that's not that. And then the one that I highlighted here is Surfland. And hopefully you realize that Surfland pretty much is coming off the market and will no longer be available because they're not making the active ingredient anymore. The last plant that was in Texas blew up right at the end of 2019 and 2020. So once the formulations that are available with that run out, that's going to be it. And then that would be Route. And the other one I have here in a second, I'll show you. It's Route, and it's an OH2. I can't remember the other one. But anyway, they're not going to be available for us eventually. And the thing is, what are we going to use for a replacement for Surfland? And the one I'd recommend is metolachlor pennant. And that's a sprayable, unfortunately. And that's the only way to use it. And then we're working on trying to get a couple companies to bring that back. So I don't know what's going to happen. If you're an old timer like me, when I started in this field in the early 90s, there was a product out called Derby. It was one of the first ornamental herbicides that we had on a granular, and it was actually simazine and metolachlor, and that was sold by the Ciba-Geigy company, which has evolved into Syngenta. And they really don't have an ornamental type ornamental type thing. I do a lot of research in that end, so I don't know what's going to happen with that. But we had a meeting with IR4, and it's one of the things I brought up, and I don't know where we're headed with this. But the other thing I wanted to mention, of course, you all hopefully are very familiar with indaziflam. I can't tell you how great that herbicide is on woody ornamentals that are established. You will get reliable 3, even 3.5 months of pre-emergent weed control with it. I know it's got some labels in turf grass too, and it's a great herbicide for that. And the Dimension, as I mentioned, is a great herbicide by itself, but it's available in that granular as Crew or Fortress. And then so you have that product available to us. So they're ones that are really good. And then of course, Gallery is in a lot of mixtures of a lot of different herbicides. And that's isoxaben, and we see that in a lot of products that we have. Mainly the one you might be very familiar with is Surfland. It's Snapshot, which is a mixture of Treflan and isoxaben. So, and these combo herbicides, which I mentioned, I talk about, these usually contain a burn down herbicide, oxyfluorphan, and a pre-emergent herbicide. And usually they do that for container people that always miss the application of the herbicide to burn down the germinating plants. But that's not the case all the time. A lot of times we have to have 2 different pre-emergent herbicides to get really good spectrums of control. And the products that we do have out there, these are pretty much it. But I mentioned the products here that you can see, and I mentioned about the Horizon. It's Route and it's Route and XL are the two that have Arizolan in them, and they're the ones that are either eventually going to go away. And then, but you can see the other product I already mentioned, Fortress and Crew, and if OH2 is another one that one will stay around. Jewel, which is still around but hardly anybody uses it. From everything I know, and still think it's still floating around here and there. You can, if you have a rep close by, they'll try to push that product, which is really safe to a lot of different things and gives you fairly good control. But it was sold by Scott's, which is evolved into two different companies now. It was Anderson's, and then I can't remember. It's an English company or a European company now. And then, of course, Snapshot, which is, as far as I know, is still the most sold pre-emergent herbicide for the nursery industry. And the reason that product is so popular is because of the safety it brings to the table. And XL or Amaze, Amaze is the one that was sold in the landscape. You can buy this at big box stores for homeowners, and I really encourage homeowners to use it because, it's very, very safe. And then, of course, Regal, the Regal company, they have the Regal 00 and Regal Star. And, of course, we have Freehand, which also is very safe for bedding type plants. And Biathlon, which is another product from OHP, which is also a fairly good product that gives you fairly good weed control. And then, of course, Gemini is another one that's out there floating around, which is prodiamine and isoxamin also. So, but anyway, Surfland, as I mentioned, is 2019. The plant burned down. I know Adama and UPL were trying to get China to make active for them, but it was just not going to work. The Chinese manufacturing companies wanted them to produce far too much product, and it was far too much product at a too high a price that they weren't going to be able to get rid of, and for too long of a period is what I was told. So if it ever comes back, I have no idea. You can see it was 22. I was talking about this last year, and then the earliest it would have come back would have been 22, but I just don't think it's coming back now. I'd be very surprised if this product makes it back in. And it's mainly because it's used for minor use crops. Apparently it's very difficult to make, and then it's just not worth it to them anymore. And we have plenty of replacements to fill in the gaps as we need it. But the great thing about what Surfland brought to the table is safety. And that's why I mentioned the Pennant Magnum or Pennant, either one of those. The Pennant Magnum is the cleaned up product that has, I don't know if you know that there's two active, there's an active and inactive molecule that it's a right and a left-handed molecule in Pennant. And then the old Pennant had both of them mixed together. The Pennant Magnum, they screened out the inactive product. And that's why the use rates are a little bit lower if you ever look at the label closely. And, anyway, the rates on Pennant, if you ever get Pennant Magnum or try to use this as a spray, is 20 to 42 ounces. So, and I like to see it at about a quart if you tank mix it with something like Gallery or I guess you could even do Simazine if you wanted to, but you're only allowed one application a year. There's 24-hour REI. And like I say, you can tank mix with Simazine or Gallery, up to 1 or 2 quarts of Simazine, and then Gallery at a pound or a quart. It depends if you get the liquid or the solid. And of course, there hasn't been very many changes at all to the post herbicides that we have. I guess you're very familiar with all the legal problems with glyphosate that are going to carry on probably for another 3 or 4 years, if not more. And then it's still going to be around. There's going to be some labeling changes, and from what I heard, that Bayer was not going to carry any more glyphosate for the homeowner, the T&O market, and that's all going to get sold out to other companies. So you're going to see a lot of different manufacturing brands and whatnot coming out. And I know there's a lot out there already, but it's probably just going to get worse. And then, we have the grass herbicides. Always remember these are the post-grass herbicides that we have. They work very well at controlling grasses post-emergently. If you have Bermuda grass or anything like I got in right when they were talking about torpedo grass. These products work really well on that, with multiple applications, and you can beat them back pretty well. And then the selective broadleaf products we have are very limited. And then the main ones that a lot of people should be familiar with, of course, are Certainty and ProSedge for ProSedge or Sedgehammer for sedge control. And then Lontrail, which is clopyralid, has a lot of uses for different ornamentals in ground that work really well at controlling some difficult weeds, such as what do I want to say? I can't think right this second. But just a lot of broadleaf type plant material that used to be very difficult. As I try to tell people, it was Canada thistle was one of the biggest problems that we used to have when I was growing up, where I grew up in Pennsylvania. We had no product like this available at the time, but I can tell you that the hours I spent pulling Canada thistle out of juniper plantings, massive juniper plantings. And if we would have had this product, it would have taken care of that problem and I wouldn't have to worry about it again. The mugwort was another one that was a big problem in Pachysandra. If you're familiar with Pachysandra, that's a big problem where I grew up around that area because it does really well in the Northeast and its seed, blows around. It's in the aster family, and Lantrell would eliminate that very well in Pachysandra. So, and of course we have Benazon or Basagran works really well at controlling a couple things that people don't utilize, but it's Basagran TNO is the one that's available and it works extremely well. And we used to have, a lot of people used to get concerned about Basagran and Image because they would control sedges, which before we had Certainty and Sedgehammer, Basagran was the only thing we had to control yellow nutsedge post, and Image was the only thing we had to control purple post in a lot of ornamental and turf situations, but both of those products have limitations. And the reason I list Garline on here, because it's in so many formulations when you're trying to control broadleaf plant material, it's available in a lot of the box stores. People come across it quite a bit. I still recommend it to people to do stump control cuttings where they have, if they have privet or honeysuckle or something like this, they can do either a 50-50 blend of Garline water or straight Garline right on a recent cut plant material, and it'll do a very good job of controlling that plant and keeping it from resprouting. A couple herbicide tips that people try to remember. Marengo and Spectacle is just a grand slam herbicide that's been around for about 6 years now. I can't remember. It came out about 15, 16. It really started to get popular. It's still a great herbicide that I talked to a lot of people. Some people are scared to use it. It's a herbicide too. I probably would not use continually in the landscape because I really think we have to worry about a little bit of root damage or buildup in the soil over time. So it's just something to be concerned with and a really good reason to rotate products. And then, Bronze-Star was excellent depending on whether you're in a landscape or a nursery situation is great. And of course we have the futile with that mixture of flumioxazin and prodiamine is also a great go-to type product. And of course, always remember Snapshot, XL, Freehand are really safe products. And we have XL until you can't get it anymore. I think I was hunting around a month ago or so, and I still saw you could get it, but they're really safe for bedding type plant material. And I always try to tell people, pre-herbicides work, and then they won't use them. And it really helps you get going in the right direction. And this is 16 weeks after treatment. I know this is pecan plantings, but if you use this product really well, it works really well. The only thing that you would have problems here is if you had yellow or purple nutsedge growing or perennial grasses is where these type, pre-emergent herbicides don't do well. And it just one or even two applications a year in a landscape will really clean things up and get you really moving in the right direction. Of course, if you use mulch, it'll really help too. And then, let's see, if you're doing pre-herbicide sprays, I don't know if you're spraying or putting down granulars, but Gallery really needs a tank mix partner. And I try to recommend, mixtures of Barricade or Pendulum with Gallery. And Marengo or SureGuard also are available in sprays. And then and flumioxazin is in a spray as SureGuard. And, the granular form of that, as I mentioned, is Broadstar. But again, these are great products, give you very good weed control, will eliminate just about any weed coming from seed. And again, the only issue you'd have would be, yellow or purple nutsedge or the grasses, and the grasses can be eliminated by the post-grass herbicides. And, you can really work on the sedges, with either Certainty or Sedgehammer, and you can do wipes with that product. You can mix it up in a bucket with a rubber glove and sponge and wipe on the herbicide onto the sedges to get rid of them. And, there's no reason that you can't clean things up if you have some time and do selective applications of these herbicides in certain situations. So again, just pre-herbicides, they work. And then I try to point these out to people. Both of these are 12 weeks after treatment. But you can see, if you have a control plant, if you're growing nursery crops, if you do not use a pre-emergent herbicide and containerized ornamentals, it's going to be a disaster. Unless you have an army of people to work for you. And if you do that, good luck finding labor and paying them. But for, $200 an acre, you can put down a herbicide and get really good weed control for about 3-4 months. So it's something to just keep in mind. And I always try to tell people, good weed control doesn't happen by accident, will not last, takes time. You never get 100% weed control. but you're still going to have to do some hand weeding. But with the herbicide use, you can eliminate quite a bit of that and have very minimal hand weeding. And I try to tell people I wish we had a selective post-emergent herbicide for every weed. I can't tell you the number of times, particularly in the blueberry industry, where they'll give me a picture and say, what can I spray on this to kill all my weeds, but not kill my blueberry plant? And that's just a silver bullet. That's not going to happen. Currently the best way we have is to use pre-herbicides. You have to get them on. It's really important to get them on if you have, you're doing container or even outside work, to get them on January, February. And then, containers I'll mention here, you have to use them several times a year and at least 4 to 6, but they provide really good control. And granulars are always poorer than sprays because of just distribution of the molecules, but still you can get really good control with granulars, and they bring safety because you're limiting the amount of herbicide that gets on the desirable plant. Let me see. And then of course sprays are always much cheaper. They're about a third cheaper to get the same active ingredient. Always remember, no rain after a pre-herbicide application is not going to be good because you don't activate that herbicide. I like to see a rain event about 72 hours at max after putting a pre-herbicide out. I don't like to see any rain after a post-herbicide event. Like if you're putting Roundup on, you don't want it to spray. I like that herbicide to dry on. If it's dry on the foliage, I'm happy with that. The longer you get, the better. But if you get it dry, you should be good to go. You have to learn how to make sure you're calibrating equipment right, or putting down the appropriate amount of product on the appropriate amount of area and equally as you can. And know the weeds you're trying to control and what stage you're trying to control them. That you're putting down a pre-herbicide on a plant that hasn't germinated yet, that's going to work really well. But if you're using a pre-herbicide, for example, like Snapshot, on weeds that have already germinated, they're not going to work very well at all. And then if field grown or landscape, like I said, you need to make at least 2 to 4 applications a year. And then it's really important to do that. And then, but once you get in a landscape, once things get filled out and you can mulch and whatnot, you get to a point where you pretty much don't have to use pre-herbicides, but they're really good when things are getting initiated and things are filling in. If you're doing containers, 4 to 6 applications a year, that's just going to be life until you stop growing plants in containers. And pre-herbicides, I always recommend people try to use 2 different products with 2 different modes of action. And it's usually with all the combo herbicides that most of the growers that I deal with that are growing nursery stock, this isn't a problem because they're always using rotating products. And if you have less than 5 acres, I really steer people towards using granulars because it's just cheaper. You don't have to worry about calibrating equipment. If you have less than 2 acres, I wouldn't even bother with spray equipment because granulars are so easy to apply. And then always remember that critical rain event after a pre-herbicide. And then in the landscape, I always remind people that it's a 2 to 4 inch layer of mulch that we try to is the best pre-emergent weed control. I would spend money on mulch all day long before I'd spend money on herbicides. And then, like I said, when plants are canopy overed in a landscape situation, you really don't need to use pre's at that point. It's just, it's just for areas that have been disturbed or you're replanting or renovating. That's where you really need to think about using products to really help curtail the weed problems that you might have. And then spraying glyphosate, be really careful with this. I'll show you just a few pictures. I'm almost done here. The only spray glyphosate on live growing plants that you want to control. Don't apply it to thin skin bark trees. Post herbicide applications need to be dry before it rains. And glyphosate's the only systemic broadleaf herbicide we have. So if you hate it, realize it's the only thing you can paint on something and it goes through the whole plant. There's a whole bunch of names that we can call that. It's I call it symplastically loaded. There's all kind of things, phloem loaded, systemic. There's all kind of words we can use. But anyway, and if you need to find the labels, these are the best places to get the labels. It's cdms.net. I use daily since for 30 years. I've been, or 20 since it's come out in the early 2000s. It's been my lifeblood. And, but anyway, as far as organics, there really hasn't been that many changes in what's available. Pretty much all these acids or oils are pretty much what comprises almost everything that we have. And there's really no pre-herbicide. There is corn gluten for turf grass, but that's it. All the organics we have are just burn downs. And so they're going to work not so well on perennial type weeds. Glyphosate, the formulations, like I say, are going to change big time. And then as we go forward here from all these lawsuits, but I always recommend people to use between 0.25 and 10% using the 41%. And if you're wicking, it's 25 to 50%, vine solution. And if you're doing stump treatments, you do 50 to 100%. And then, it's all the stuff that went on about glyphosate, it's just disaster for Monsanto, which they handed it off to Bayer. And they're dealing with it. Anyway, the thin skin sprays on the bottom of the trees, this is what you're going to get on a crepe myrtle. And then if you do that 6 times a year for 2 years, that's what your crepe myrtles plants are going to look like. If you have contaminated tanks where you have some water in it, have some glyphosate, you mix up a fungicide in it and spray your hydrangeas, that's what your hydrangeas are going to look like. Same one side, this was a micro sprayer. You can see the side of the tree with stunted growth. This is a classic Roundup damage, or it's actually a classic enzyme inhibiting herbicide damage, but this is what it's going to look like. And this is what I call sublethal dose, plant sick, not doing well, not elongating, classic glyphosate damage. Same thing here in crepe myrtles, thin skin plant. They're spraying around the base of the tree, and this is what happens. Hydrangeas, this is one years ago I had with the tank. I had it, and there was probably 4 or 5 greenhouses full of hydrangeas, and it was a gradient effect. And then you start asking questions, and this is the glyphosate damage in hydrangeas. Let me see here. Oh, dicamba damage. This is what you might run into too if you're next to any crop fields like cotton, soybeans, or even pasture fields. They have these growth regulator herbicides, and this has been cropping up more and more in a lot of the crops I'm dealing with. But if you get drift type problems, this is what's going to look like on this is azalea. You're going to get drift problems, even very low use rates. Crepe myrtles, that you can get stunted buds, a lot of twisting. The leaves are starting to curl and twist. Oaks, this is where people are applying 2,4-D, the 3-way mix to the turf grass, spraying it when there's not even any weeds, killing all these 4-inch caliper beautiful oaks. And more likely, this tree is not going to come back in a reasonable amount of time. It's going to have to come out. And this was a gated community. There was probably, I was calculating about $2-3 million damage in there because these people were spraying this turf grass when there was 0 weeds in turf grass. And this is why you use pre-emergent herbicides. And they were just coming in there spraying Trimec 3 times a year. And this is what happens. And pretty much if you analyze that tissue, you're going to eventually find some dicamba, 2,4-D or MCPP. And then if I look at that tree, that's going to have to come in. You have to take that tree out, replant it. That's going to be $1,500, $2,000 minimum per tree. You have 1,000 trees you're dealing with. Go ahead. Good luck paying that bill. And we could have told you not to do that many times with good agricultural practices. They should have gone in there, and once they had a weed problem over so many weeds per square foot, they could have come in and used a post-emergent herbicide and then gotten rid of that and avoided all this problem because they'd only be using it once every 3-4 years. Flumioxazin damage, that's granular. This is what it's going to look like a lot of times. This is pittosporums, hydrangeas, where you get dead spots. That's really common. And then the other one was the last one I have here is dithiopyr, where they were using Tower and Crew, and the guy got really heavy-handed with the dithiopyr, and this is what some of his conifers were looking like. So anyway, you can see the buds and whatnot and how they look. But anyway, and this is a heavy-handedness on some elms and whatnot. But anyway, you can see what they look like. It's growth regulator type damage, and that's it. Sorry, I ran over a little bit. So if you have any other questions, let me know, and I'll try to answer them. I see there's some chat and some questions, and if I see anything, just let me know.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark. We are basically running out of time.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry I went over. Yep.
That's fine. The email address of all the speakers. So I would just encourage you directly contact Dr. Hudson and Mark and also Jean Woodward and ask your questions. Okay. Thank you so much for your attention and participation in this webinar.